There is a secret in this story that most people won't see coming. And when it finally comes out, everything changes. A rich man posted an ad for a cleaning lady. 30 applicants. He picked the quiet one, the one with the worn shoes and the soft voice. He gave her a mop and a set of keys and told her to start in the basement. But what he didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that the woman scrubbing his floors had signed the deed to the entire property 6 months ago. She owned every brick, every hallway, every square foot he stood on. And she let him talk down to her for 3 months before she showed him the papers. So glad you're here. Before the story starts, please like and subscribe. And one more thing, drop your location in the comments. Are you watching from Chicago, Accra, maybe Montego Bay or Dublin? Let us know. Now, let me tell you about a building. Not a beautiful building, not yet. It sat on the corner of Fulton Street and 7th Avenue in a part of the city that people used to drive past without turning their heads. 12 floors of brown brick with windows that hadn't been replaced since the 80s. The lobby had green tile that was cracked in 14 places. Yes, 14, someone had counted once during a tenants meeting, and the number stuck. The elevator worked on odd days and didn't on even ones, or at least that's what it felt like. The hallways smelled like carpet cleaner and something underneath the carpet cleaner that the carpet cleaner was trying to hide. It was the kind of building that had a story in every stain and a problem behind every wall. And nobody loved it except the people who couldn't afford to leave. The building was called the Fulton. Not Fulton Tower or Fulton Place or anything with ambition attached to it. Just the Fulton. Plain. Like a man who introduces himself by his last name only and dares you to ask questions. There were 42 units in the Fulton. Apartments on floors 2 through 10. The 11th floor was commercial, a dentist's office, a tax preparer, and a room that had been empty for 2 years with a sign on the door that said, "Coming soon," but nothing ever came. The 12th floor was the penthouse, if you could call it that. It was just a bigger apartment with a better view and a balcony that nobody used because the railing wobbled. The ground floor was where our story begins. That was where Victor Albright had his office. Victor Albright was 53 years old. He was a property manager, not the owner, though he behaved like one. He had been managing the Fulton for 7 years on behalf of a holding company called Greenvale Properties, which was owned by a man named Mr. Harmon, whom nobody had ever met. Mr. Harmon lived somewhere overseas and communicated through emails that were always 3 sentences long and signed, "Regards, H." That was it. Victor had never heard the man's voice, never seen his face. He just received instructions and a monthly management fee and operated the Fulton like it was his kingdom. And Victor ran it like a king who had forgotten what servants were for. He was a tall man, 6'2", with a belly that arrived in rooms before the rest of him did. He had thinning brown hair he combed over a bald spot he thought nobody noticed, and everyone noticed. He wore polo shirts tucked into khaki pants with a belt that was always 1 notch too tight. He had small eyes, the kind that squinted even when the light was normal, and a voice that was permanently set to the volume of a man who believes being loud is the same as being right. He had a habit of jangling his keys, a massive ring of keys to every door in the building, like a jailer walking the corridor. Victor's office was on the ground floor, behind the lobby. A glass door with gold lettering that said, "Building Management, V. Albright." Inside, there was a desk too big for the room, a leather chair that squeaked when he leaned back, 2 filing cabinets he never organized, and a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Boss," which he had bought for himself. He had an assistant named Tanya. Tanya was 29, sharp and tired in equal measure, with box braids she kept pulled back during work, and a patience for Victor's nonsense that she described to her friends as running on fumes. Tanya handled the real work, tenant complaints, maintenance schedules, vendor contracts. Victor handled the walking around looking important. Now, the tenants. There were people in the Fulton who had lived there for decades. Mrs. Okafor on the 4th floor, a 71-year-old Nigerian widow who had raised 3 sons in apartment 4B and now lived alone with a cat named Professor. Mr. and Mrs. Chen on the 7th floor, who ran a tailoring business out of their living room that Victor pretended not to know about. A young couple on the 9th floor, Darnell and Keisha, who had just had a baby and whose apartment had a leak in the ceiling that Victor had promised to fix 4 times and never did. And there was a boy named Kofi. He was 10 years old. He lived on the 5th floor with his grandmother, Mrs. Ama Boateng, a 68-year-old Ghanaian woman who had come to this country 30 years ago and cleaned hotels for 20 of them before her knees gave out. Kofi was small, serious, and wore glasses that were slightly too large for his face, giving him the look of a tiny professor examining the world with great suspicion. He carried a sketchbook everywhere. He drew buildings. Not the buildings he saw, the buildings he imagined. Towers with gardens on every floor. Houses that curved like seashells. Libraries shaped like open books. His grandmother said, "That boy doesn't just see the world, he redesigns it." But what happened next changed everything. One Tuesday morning, Victor posted an ad. Cleaner needed for commercial building. Part-time. Evenings and weekends. Must be reliable, thorough, and available immediately. Apply in person. He taped the ad to the lobby door, the elevator door, and the bulletin board by the mailboxes. He didn't post it online. Victor didn't trust the internet for hiring. He said it attracted the wrong kind of people, a phrase Tanya had told him 3 times to stop using. 30 people came in over the next week. Victor interviewed them at his desk in his too big chair, jangling his keys, asking questions that revealed more about him than about the applicants. He asked a 60-year-old man if he could keep up. He asked a young woman if she had family obligations that might interfere. He asked a man with an accent where he was originally from. Tanya sat in the corner and kept her face neutral and wrote notes that were mostly just the word "yikes" in different handwriting styles. On the 8th day, a woman walked in. She was small, 5'3". She wore a plain gray dress that reached her knees, flat shoes that were clean but worn at the heels, and a cardigan with a button missing on the left cuff. Her hair was black, cut short, natural, close to her head in a style that was practical and precise. She had dark brown skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that were so calm they made the room feel quieter just by being in it. She carried a small bag, not a purse, more like a cloth tote, and she stood in the doorway of Victor's office and waited until he looked up. He didn't look up for 45 seconds. She counted. She always counted. He said, "Name?" She said, "Ada. Ada Mensah." He said, "Experience?" She said, "I've cleaned many buildings." He said, "References?" She said, "I can provide them if needed." Victor leaned back. The chair squeaked. He looked at her shoes. He looked at the missing button on her cardigan. He said, "You understand this is a physical job. Mopping, scrubbing, trash, bathrooms. Not glamorous." Ada said, "I'm not looking for glamour, sir. I'm looking for work." Victor smiled. The kind of smile that people smile when they feel superior and want you to know it without having to say it. He said, "When can you start?" Ada said, "Tonight." And that was only the beginning. Ada Mensah started that evening. Victor gave her a mop, a bucket, a ring of keys, smaller than his, he made sure of that, and a supply closet on the ground floor that smelled like bleach and damp cardboard. He gave her a list. Lobby floors, mopped nightly. Hallways on all 12 floors swept Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Bathrooms in the commercial spaces cleaned daily. Stairwells once a week. Trash from common areas every night. He gave her one more instruction. He pointed to his office door and said, "My office gets cleaned last. Every night. I want the floor mopped, the desk wiped, the trash emptied, and the windows cleaned once a week. Do not touch the filing cabinets. Do not move anything on my desk. Understood?" Ada nodded. She said, "Understood." He said, "Good. If you do well, we'll keep you on month to month. If you don't, well, there were 29 other applicants." Ada picked up the mop. She started in the basement. Let me tell you something about the way Ada cleaned. She didn't just clean. She studied. She moved through the Fulton the way an architect moves through a building they are assessing. Not just seeing the surfaces, but understanding the structure underneath. She noticed that the pipes on the 3rd floor were sweating, which meant insulation was failing. She noticed that the fire exit on the 8th floor stuck at the hinge and took 11 seconds to open instead of 3. She noticed that the electrical panel in the basement had 2 breakers labeled incorrectly.
She noticed the crack pattern in the lobby tile and understood it was caused by settling in the northeast corner of the foundation, probably from a drainage issue outside. She wrote none of this down. She kept it in her head. She also noticed the people. Mrs. Okafor, who came down to check her mailbox every evening at 7:45 and always said, "Good evening, dear," and always smelled like palm oil and ivory soap. Darnell, who carried his baby daughter up 9 flights of stairs on the nights the elevator didn't work, singing softly to keep her asleep. Kofi, who sat in the stairwell on the 5th floor after school, drawing in his sketchbook because the light was better there than in his grandmother's apartment. Ada stopped the first time she saw Kofi's drawings. She was sweeping the 5th floor landing. He was sitting on the top step with his oversized glasses and his pencil moving fast across the page. She looked over his shoulder and saw a building
with a rooftop garden and glass walls and a spiral staircase that wrapped around the outside like a vine. She said, "That's beautiful." Kofi looked up. He wasn't used to adults saying that about his drawings. His grandmother said it, but grandmothers were supposed to say that. Strangers didn't. He said, "It's not finished." Ada sat down on the step below him. She set her broom against the wall. She said, "Tell me about it." Kofi looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "It's a building where everyone can see the sky, even the people on the bottom floor, because the staircase is on the outside and there are windows everywhere. Nobody feels stuck." Ada said, "That sounds like a building worth living in." Kofi said, "I want to build it someday." Ada said, "Then you will." Kofi smiled. A small, careful smile, like a door opening an inch. But what Ada didn't tell Kofi, what she didn't tell anyone in the Fulton, was that she already knew how buildings worked. Not from cleaning them, from owning them. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Ada Mensah was not who Victor thought she was. She was not who anyone in that building thought she was. Ada was the sole owner of Mensah Development Group, a real estate company she had built over 15 years from a single duplex she bought with savings from her first job cleaning hotels, the same kind of work Kofi's grandmother had done. Ada started at the bottom. She knew every floor because she had mopped every kind of floor there was. She knew what buildings needed because she had lived in the worst of them and cleaned the best of them, and understood the difference between a building that housed people and a building that held them. She had grown her company quietly, one property at a time, duplex to fourplex, fourplex to a small apartment building, small building to a larger one. She reinvested every dollar.
She lived modestly. The gray dress, the worn shoes, the missing button were not poverty. They were choice. Ada didn't believe in looking rich. She believed in being useful. 18 months ago, Ada had learned that the Fulton was for sale. Greenvale Properties, the holding company that owned it, was dissolving. The mysterious Mr. Harmon was liquidating his assets. The Fulton was listed quietly, not on the open market, but through a commercial broker that Ada's lawyer happened to know. She looked at the listing. She looked at the building. She saw what Kofi saw, not what it was, but what it could be. She bought it, cash. The transaction closed 6 months before she walked into Victor's office in her gray dress and asked for a cleaning job. The deed was in her name, Ada Mensah, owner of the Fulton. And she told no one, because Ada didn't buy buildings to flip them or gut them or raise the rents and push people out, which is what most buyers did in this part of the city.
She bought buildings to understand them. She wanted to know the Fulton from the inside. She wanted to know the tenants, the problems, the rhythms, the heartbeat of the place. And she had learned over 15 years that the fastest way to understand a building was to be invisible inside it, to carry a mop, to empty trash, to be the person nobody watches. She wanted to see how the building was managed. She wanted to see if the tenants were treated well. She wanted to know who Victor Albright really was when nobody important was looking. And what she found made her blood simmer. Victor was lazy.
That was the least of it. He approved maintenance requests and then never followed through. He kept 2 sets of books, one for the tenants to see, and one he kept in the locked filing cabinet that he told Ada not to touch. He charged tenants for repairs that never happened. He overcharged for laundry machine maintenance that consisted of him calling a repairman once a year and pocketing the difference. He skimmed from the common area fund. Small amounts, 20 here, 50 there, not enough to trigger an audit, just enough to add up to thousands over 7 years. He was also cruel in the small ways that cruelty hides. He spoke to tenants the way he spoke to Ada, like they were beneath him. He called Mrs. Okafor, that African lady, behind her back. He told Darnell the ceiling leak was not a priority, while sitting in an office with a leather chair he had bought with building funds. He told Kofi's grandmother that if she couldn't pay her rent increase, there are plenty of other buildings in this city, knowing full well she had nowhere else to go. Ada saw all of this. She heard it through walls, through doors left open, through the things tenants said to her because the cleaning lady was safe to talk to. She wrote nothing down. She kept it all in her head. The same head that held the pipe insulation problem, and the fire exit timing, and the electrical panel labels, and the foundation crack. She kept cleaning. 3 months. 12 weeks of mopping and scrubbing and emptying Victor's trash and wiping his desk around the world's best boss mug and listening to him jangle his keys like he owned the place. And just when you think you know how this story ends, you don't. It happened on a Friday afternoon in March. Victor called Ada into his office. She came in with her mop and stood in the doorway, same as always, waiting for him to look up. He took 30 seconds. She counted. He said, "Ada, I need to talk to you about your performance." She said, "Yes, sir?" He said, "The bathroom on the 11th floor wasn't up to standard yesterday. The mirror had streaks, and the lobby floor had a scuff mark near the elevator that you missed." Ada said, "I'll take care of it." He leaned back. The chair squeaked. He said, "I've been lenient with you, but I need you to understand something. This building has standards. I have standards. If you can't meet them, I'll find someone who can. The door is right there." Ada looked at him. She looked at the mug. She looked at the filing cabinet she wasn't supposed to touch. She looked at the keys on his belt, jangling softly, the sound of a man who believed that holding keys meant holding power. She said, "Mr. Albright, may I ask you a question?" He waved his hand. "Go ahead." She said, "In the 7 years you've managed this building, how many times have you personally inspected the fire exits?" He blinked. He said, "What?" She said, "The fire exit on the 8th floor takes 11 seconds to open. The code requires 3. How many times have you checked it?" He said, That's not your concern." She said, "The pipe insulation on the 3rd floor is deteriorating. There's visible condensation. If it fails in winter, you'll have burst pipes on 3 floors. Are you aware of that?" He sat up straighter. He said, "Who told you?" She said, "The electrical panel in the basement has 2 breakers mislabeled. Breaker 14 is marked Lobby East, but it actually controls the 6th floor corridor lighting. If there's an emergency and someone throws the wrong breaker, people could be left in the dark." Victor's face was changing. The color was rising. His small eyes were getting smaller. He said, "Listen, I don't know what you think." Ada reached into her cloth tote bag. She pulled out a folder. She set it on his desk, right next to the world's best boss mug. She opened it. Inside were documents: the deed to the Fulton, transfer of ownership papers, a corporate filing for Mensa Development Group, and her photograph, a professional headshot, the same face, the same calm eyes, attached to a notarized letter confirming that Ada Mensa was the sole owner of the property located at the corner of Fulton Street and 7th Avenue. Victor looked at the papers. He picked up the deed. He read it. He set it down. He picked it up again. His mouth opened and closed, like a man trying to breathe underwater. Ada said, "My name is Ada Mensa. I purchased this building 6 months ago. I have been cleaning it for 3 months.
I have inspected every floor, every stairwell, every pipe, every wire, every exit, every hallway. I have met every tenant. I have seen how you manage this property, and I have seen how you treat the people who live in it." Victor stood up. His chair rolled backward and hit the filing cabinet. He said, You can't. This is some kind of—" Ada said, "It is not a trick, Mr. Albright. It is a reckoning. You have overcharged tenants for maintenance that never happened. You have skimmed from the common area fund. You have ignored safety violations that put residents at risk. You have spoken about the people in this building with disrespect and contempt. And you have done all of this while sitting in a chair you bought with their money, drinking from a mug that calls you the world's best boss." She picked up the mug. She turned it around in her hands. She set it back down. She said, "I came here as a cleaner because I wanted to see this building the way the people at the bottom see it. And what I saw is a building full of good people being managed by a man who doesn't deserve them." Victor's hands were gripping the edge of the desk. His knuckles were white. His face was red. He said, "You can't fire me. I have a contract." Ada pulled another paper from the folder. She slid it across the desk. She said, "Your contract was with Greenvale Properties. Greenvale no longer exists. The new owner, that's me, has no obligation to honor a contract with a dissolved entity. I had my lawyer verify this. Twice." Victor looked at the paper. He looked at Ada. He said, "I'll sue." Ada said, "You can try, but I should tell you that I've documented everything. The double books, the skimmed funds, the unapproved charges. Tanya has been very helpful." Victor's head snapped toward the corner of the office. Tanya was standing in the doorway. She was holding a binder, a thick binder. The kind of binder women carry when they've been keeping receipts for 7 years. Tanya said, "I've been waiting for this day for a very long time, Victor." She set the binder on the desk. She looked at Ada and said, "Everything's in there. Dates, amounts, accounts, all of it." Victor sat back down. Slowly. The chair squeaked. But this time the sound was different. This time it sounded like a door closing. Ada said, "You have until the end of the month to vacate this office. You will return all keys. You will not contact any tenant. You will not remove any files. And you will leave the mug." Victor said, "The mug?" Ada said, "I'm keeping it, as a reminder of what bad management looks like." She turned to Tanya. She said, "Would you like to stay on as building manager? Proper title, proper salary, benefits?" Tanya's eyes filled up. She blinked fast. She said, "Are you serious?" Ada said, "I don't joke about work. I never have." Tanya said, "Then yes, absolutely yes. Stay with us, because the rest of this story will change the way you think about who deserves power." Victor left the Fulton at the end of March. He packed his desk into 2 cardboard boxes and walked through the lobby one last time, past the cracked green tile, past the elevator that worked on odd days, past the mailboxes where Mrs. Okafor checked her mail every evening at 7:45. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said goodbye. He just walked out the front door with his boxes and his too-tight belt and his jangling keys, except they weren't his keys anymore, because Ada had taken them back, every single one. The next morning, Ada called a building-wide meeting. She stood in the lobby in her gray dress and her worn shoes and looked at the tenants of the Fulton. Mrs. Okafor with Professor the cat in her arms, Darnell with his baby daughter on his shoulder, Mr. and Mrs. Chen standing close together, Kofi sitting cross-legged on the floor with his sketchbook, and Mrs. Boateng in a folding chair because standing for long hurt her knees. Ada said, "My name is Ada Mensah. I am the new owner of this building. Some of you know me as the cleaning lady. That's because I was the cleaning lady. I cleaned this building for 3 months so I could understand it. And now I want to tell you what I plan to do with it." She told them. She was going to fix the pipes, replace the tile, repair every fire exit, update the electrical panels, fix Darnell's ceiling leak, install a proper laundry system, repaint the hallways. She was not going to raise rents, not for 2 years. After 2 years, any increases would be capped and tied to actual improvements the tenants could see and approve. Mrs. Okafor said, "How do we know you mean it?" Ada said, "Because I've already started. The plumber is coming Monday. The electrician is coming Wednesday. And the ceiling in Darnell's apartment is being repaired this weekend." Darnell, who had been standing in the back, said, "This weekend? For real?" Ada said, "For real." Darnell shifted his baby to his other shoulder, and his eyes got bright, and he said, "My daughter's been sleeping in the living room because of that leak. You're telling me she can sleep in her own room by Sunday?" Ada said, "By Saturday, if the plumber doesn't hit traffic." The room laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was a nervous, hopeful, barely believing it laugh. The kind of laugh people laugh when something good is happening and they're afraid to trust it. Kofi raised his hand. Ada pointed to him. He stood up. His oversized glasses caught the lobby light. He held up his sketchbook and said, "Miss Ada, I drew a building. It has a rooftop garden where everyone can see the sky. Could we do that here?" Ada looked at that drawing. She looked at this 10-year-old boy with his grandmother's strength and his own imagination, and a vision for a building that was better than the one he lived in. She said, "Show me." Kofi walked up and held the sketchbook open. Ada crouched down and studied it. She traced the spiral staircase with her finger. She looked at the garden layout. She looked at the glass walls. She said, "This is very good work, Kofi. The proportions are correct. The staircase would need a load-bearing modification on the southwest corner, but the concept is sound." Kofi's eyes went wide. He said, "You know about load-bearing?" Ada said, "I know about buildings, and I think a rooftop garden is exactly what the Fulton needs." Kofi looked at his grandmother. Mrs. Boateng was crying, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks and into the collar of her blouse. Kofi said, "Grandmama, why are you crying?" Mrs. Boateng wiped her face and said, "Because a woman who mopped our floors just told my grandson his dream is possible. And she meant it. I can tell when people mean it." 6 months later, the Fulton was unrecognizable. Not from the outside. Ada kept the brown brick, kept the name, kept the two-word plainness of a building that didn't need to impress anyone. But inside, everything had changed. New tile in the lobby. Warm terracotta, not cracked green. The elevator worked every day. The hallways smelled like fresh paint instead of hidden problems. Darnell's baby slept in her own room under a ceiling that didn't drip. Mrs. Okafor had new windows that opened properly for the first time in a decade. Mr. and Mrs. Chen got a formal lease amendment that acknowledged their tailoring business and gave them proper commercial standing on the 7th floor. And on the roof, a garden. Not a fancy one, not a magazine garden, a real one. Wooden planter boxes built by a carpenter Ada hired who reminded her of someone, though she never said who. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, collard greens, lettuce, a section for flowers that Mrs. Okafor tended every morning, a bench where Darnell sat with his daughter in the evenings and pointed at airplanes, a small table where Mr. Chen drank tea and read newspapers in Mandarin, and in the corner, a drafting table, a real one, professional grade, that Ada had installed for Kofi. Kofi sat at that table every Saturday morning, drawing buildings. Ada sat with him sometimes. She brought books, architecture books, engineering books, books about women who built things in countries where people told them they couldn't. She brought a set of drafting pencils, the good kind, the kind that felt like they meant business. Kofi held them like they were made of glass. One Saturday, Kofi was drawing a new building, a tall one. He said, "Miss Ada, can I ask you something?" She said, "Always." He said, "Why did you clean our building? You own buildings. You have money. You could have just walked in and told everyone who you were. Why did you clean?" Ada was quiet. She looked at the rooftop garden. She looked at the city beyond it. All those buildings, all those windows, all those lives stacked on top of each other. She said, "Because my mother cleaned buildings. For 30 years. Hotels, offices, schools. She cleaned them all. And she used to say something I never forgot. She said, 'You cannot fix what you do not touch, and you cannot lead people you do not know.' So I clean first, then I lead." Kofi thought about this. He pushed his glasses up. He said, "So cleaning is like drawing." Ada said, "How so?" Kofi said, "When I draw a building, I have to start with the foundation. Not the pretty parts, not the garden or the windows. The foundation. The part nobody sees. That's what you did. You started with the part nobody sees." Ada looked at this boy. This 10-year-old boy sitting at a drafting table on a rooftop garden that existed because he drew it in a stairwell, and a woman with a mop stopped long enough to look. She said, "Kofi, you are going to build extraordinary things." He said, "I know." Not with arrogance, with certainty. The kind of certainty that children have when someone they trust tells them who they are. Mrs. Boateng came up to the roof with a plate of food. Jollof rice and fried plantains and a stew that smelled like warmth itself. She set it on the table and said, "You two can't build on empty stomachs." She sat down on the bench and watched her grandson eat with one hand and draw with the other. And she looked at Ada and said, "I cleaned hotels for 20 years. Nobody ever looked at me the way you look at my grandson. Like he matters." Ada said, "He does matter. Everyone in this building matters, that's why I'm here." Mrs. Boateng reached out and took Ada's hand. Her old hand, rough from 20 years of hotel sheets and bathroom tiles, held Ada's hand, which was rough from the same kind of work done in the same kind of silence. Two women who had cleaned their way through the world, holding hands on a rooftop while a boy drew buildings that didn't exist yet but would. Tanya came up the stairs with a clipboard. She was thriving. New title, new salary, new energy. She walked taller now. She smiled more. She still had the binder. She kept it in her desk, bottom drawer. "Just in case," she said. She told Ada that a journalist from the local paper wanted to do a story about the Fulton, about the renovation, about the owner who cleaned her own building before fixing it. Ada said, "Tell them they can come. But I don't want the story to be about me. I want it to be about the building." Tanya said, "Ada, you bought a building, cleaned it undercover for 3 months, fired a corrupt manager, and built a rooftop garden designed by a 10-year-old. The story is about you whether you like it or not." Ada almost smiled. She said, "Then make sure they spell Kofi's name right." The article ran the following month. The photograph on the front page showed Kofi standing on the rooftop with his sketchbook open, pointing at the garden he designed, with Ada beside him in her gray dress and Mrs. Boateng behind them in her folding chair, and the city skyline stretching out beyond them like a promise. The headline said, "The owner who cleaned first." People in the neighborhood read it. People in the city read it. Other building owners read it, and some of them felt uncomfortable, which was exactly the point. Darnell cut the article out and pinned it to his refrigerator. Mrs. Okafor mailed a copy to each of her 3 sons.
Mr. Chen framed it and hung it in his tailoring shop next to a photograph of his parents. Victor Albright read it too. Sitting in a studio apartment across town, working at a storage facility now, managing nothing but boxes and silence. He read the article and he looked at the photograph of Ada in her gray dress, standing on a rooftop that used to be nothing but tar paper and pigeon droppings, and he thought about the day she walked into his office with worn shoes and a missing button, and he handed her a mop and told her to start in the basement. He didn't call, he didn't write. He just sat with the newspaper on his lap and felt something he had never learned to name. Not shame, exactly. Recognition. The recognition that he had looked at a woman every day for 3 months and never once seen her, because he was too busy jangling his keys. 2 years later, Kofi won a citywide Young Architects competition. He was 12. His design, a community center with a rooftop garden, glass walls, and a spiral walkway, took first place out of 300 entries. The judges said his work showed an unusual understanding of how buildings serve people, not the other way around. At the award ceremony, Kofi stood at the podium in a suit his grandmother had altered herself using skills she learned from Mr. Chen. He adjusted his glasses. They fit now because Ada had taken him to get a proper pair. He looked out at the audience and said, "I want to thank my grandmama for teaching me that hard work is the foundation of everything. I want to thank Mr. Chen for teaching me that details matter. I want to thank Miss Tanya for always making sure the building ran right so I could focus on drawing. And I want to thank Miss Ada." He paused. He looked at Ada in the third row.
She was sitting with Mrs. Boateng and Tanya and Darnell, who had brought his daughter, now 3 years old, wearing a dress with buildings printed on it that Mrs. Chen had sewn specially for the occasion. Kofi said, "Miss Ada cleaned our building. She mopped the floors and scrubbed the bathrooms and emptied the trash. And one day, she sat down on a step next to me and looked at my drawings and said, 'That's beautiful.' Nobody except my grandmama had ever said that to me before. And because she said it, I believed it. And because I believed it, I kept drawing. And because I kept drawing, I'm standing here." He looked down at the podium. He said, "Miss Ada told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'You cannot fix what you do not touch.' I think that's true about buildings. But I think it's also true about people. You have to get close to them. You have to sit down on their step. You have to look at what they're making. Even if you own the whole building, you have to be willing to start in the basement." He stepped back from the podium. The room applauded. Mrs. Boateng was crying again. Tanya was clapping so hard her box braids were bouncing. Darnell's daughter was clapping too, tiny hands smacking together, not understanding why but feeling the energy of a room full of people recognizing something true. Ada sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were bright, but she didn't cry. She just looked at Kofi, this boy she had found in a stairwell with a sketchbook and a dream. And she nodded. One small nod. The kind of nod that says, "I see you. I have always seen you. And I always will." After the ceremony, Kofi walked up to Ada with his trophy, a small glass prism on a wooden base. He held it out to her. He said, "This is for you." Ada said, "Kofi, this is yours. You earned it." Kofi said, "I know, but my grandmama says you should always give the first fruit to the person who watered the seed." Ada took the trophy. She held it carefully. She said, "I'll keep it on my desk." Kofi grinned. The same small, careful grin she had seen the first day in the stairwell, a door opening an inch. Except now the door was wide open. Mrs. Boateng wheeled over. She took Ada's hand again. She said, "You watered more than one seed, you know. You watered the whole building." Ada looked at the trophy in one hand and Mrs. Boateng's hand in the other, and she said, quietly, the way she said everything, "My mother always said that a building isn't bricks and pipes. It's the people inside it. And people don't need a manager. They need someone willing to get on their knees and clean beside them." Mrs. Boateng squeezed her hand and said, "Your mother raised a good woman." Ada squeezed back and said, "She raised a woman who listens. That's all any of us really need." That night, Ada went back to the Fulton. She walked through the lobby with its warm terracotta tile. She took the elevator, which worked every day now, to the 12th floor. She stepped out onto the rooftop garden. The city lights spread below like a scattered puzzle. The planter boxes were full of green things growing. Kofi's drafting table sat in the corner, covered with drawings of buildings that didn't exist yet. She sat on the bench. She held the trophy in her lap. She looked up at the sky, and she thought about her mother, about 30 years of hotel hallways and bathroom floors and hands that smelled like bleach at the end of every shift, about a woman who never owned a building but understood them better than anyone who did, about a voice that said every night before bed, "Ada, you cannot fix what you do not touch." She whispered into the dark, "I touched it, Mama. Every floor, every stairwell, every step. And look what grew." A breeze came through the garden. The tomato plants rustled. The herbs released their scent. Basil and rosemary and something older, something that smelled like home. And Ada Mensah, the woman who owned the building but cleaned it first, sat on a rooftop bench above a city full of buildings and felt something she had been chasing her entire life. Not success, not wealth, not recognition. Belonging.
The kind that comes not from owning the walls, but from knowing every crack in them. From mopping the floor before you sit behind the desk. From looking at a child's drawing and saying, "That's beautiful." From starting at the bottom because the bottom is where the truth lives. And the truth is this: the people who build the best things are the ones who aren't afraid to get on their knees first. Welcome, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Now tell us, where are you tuning in from? Dallas, Durban, maybe Bridgetown or Toronto? We read every single comment.